Have you ever wondered what your favorite celebrities actually looked like before fame, filters, and modern styling took over their image? Because what you're about to see might completely change the way you think about them. Today, we're going back in time, not just a few years, but decades, to uncover rare vintage photos of celebrities when they were far away from red carpets, luxury brands, and global fame. And trust me, some of these transformations are so surprising, you might have to look twice just to believe it's the same person. Let's begin. Before fame, many of these stars lived completely ordinary lives. No paparazzi, no makeup teams, no stylists, just real people growing up, struggling, learning, and slowly building the paths that would one day make them global icons. And that's exactly what makes these old photos so fascinating. They show the human side of fame. Take a moment and imagine your favorite actor or singer as a teenager, probably awkward, probably unknown, and definitely not the polished image we see today. That's exactly what these rare photos reveal. In some of these vintage images, you'll notice something surprising. Confidence wasn't always there from the beginning. Many celebrities looked shy, simple, and even completely unrecognizable compared to their current image. But that's the reality of transformation. Fame doesn't happen overnight. It's built through years of struggle, rejection, and persistence. And when you look at these photos closely, you start to see the story behind the success. There are pictures of early school days, casual family moments, and even early career attempts where nobody could have predicted what these individuals would become. Some were waiting tables. Some were performing in small local events. And some were just dreaming in silence. But here's the interesting part. Even in these old photos, you can sometimes see a spark, a certain expression, a presence, something that hints they were destined for something bigger. Now, let's talk about transformation. When you compare these vintage images with today's celebrity world, the difference is shocking, not just in appearance, but in energy. Today, they are polished, confident, and globally recognized. Back then, they were just figuring life out like everyone else. And that's what makes these photos powerful. They remind us that every big name once started from zero. Another surprising thing you'll notice is how different fashion and style used to be. Old hairstyles, simple clothing, and natural looks give these photos a completely different vibe. There's no perfection, just real moments captured in time. And somehow, that raw authenticity makes them even more interesting than modern photos. Because perfection is everywhere today, but realness is rare. As we go through more of these vintage images, one thing becomes clear. Time changes everything. Faces mature. Styles evolve. Confidence builds. And success reshapes identity. But the early version of these celebrities, that's where the real story begins. You might even find yourself thinking, I never expected them to look like this. And that's the magic of old photographs. They remove the filter of fame and show us the truth behind the journey. It's also a reminder for all of us watching today that everyone starts somewhere, no matter how successful or famous someone becomes. There was always a time when they were unknown, unnoticed, and just trying to make their way forward. These rare photos are not just images. They are proof of growth, patience, and transformation. Now, as we reach the end of this journey through time, take a moment to reflect on what you've seen. Fame didn't change who these people were. It revealed who they were becoming. And maybe that's the biggest lesson hidden in these vintage photos. Behind every face you recognize today, there was once a completely ordinary beginning. So the next time you see a celebrity on screen, remember this. You are only seeing the final version of a story that started long ago in moments just like these. And who knows, the next global icon might be somewhere out there right now, living their own before fame moment, because every legend starts as a normal person, just like everyone else. And as we continue exploring these rare vintage moments, you start to realize something even deeper. These photos are not just about celebrities. They're about time itself. Every picture captures a moment that will never come back again, a younger face, an earlier version of life, and a version of the world that no longer exists. And that's what makes them so powerful. Because when you look at these images closely, you don't just see fame, you see change. You see how time slowly builds a person, step by step, moment by moment. Now imagine this At that time, none of these people knew what was coming next. They didn't know they would become global icons, household names, or faces known across the world. They were simply living their lives, one day at a time. And that's something we often forget today. We only see the final result, the success, the fame, the recognition, but we rarely see the beginning. These vintage photos fill that gap. They remind us that every success story is a hidden chapter, a chapter where nothing is guaranteed, and everything is still possible. And maybe that's why people love seeing these old images so much. Because deep down, they are not just looking at celebrities, they are looking at transformation. Now, as we reach the final part of this journey, let's bring it back to you, because this story is not just about them. It's also about perspective. If they can go from unknown beginnings to global fame, then it proves something important. Change is always possible. Growth takes time. And every journey starts somewhere small. So when you see these rare vintage photos, don't just think of them as before and after. Think of them as proof that every extraordinary life starts in the most ordinary way, and that maybe, just maybe, the next incredible transformation is already happening somewhere right now, waiting to be discovered. And as we come to the end of these rare vintage memories, there's one final thing worth remembering. Fame, success, and recognition don't happen in an instant. They are built quietly in the background long before the world ever notices. Every celebrity you see today was once just a normal person, living a normal life with normal struggles. But what made the difference was time, patience, and persistence. These old photos are more than just nostalgic images. They are reminders that transformation is real, that change is possible, and that no matter where someone starts, their story is still being written. So the next time you see a celebrity shining on screen, remember this. You're not just seeing a famous face. You're seeing years of unseen effort. You're seeing a journey that began long before the spotlight ever arrived. And maybe that's what makes these vintage photos so special. They don't just show us who these people were. They show us what it takes to become who they are. Because in the end, every legend starts as a simple story, waiting for its moment to be told. And as we slowly reach the end of this journey through rare vintage memories, there's something deeper we need to understand. Because what we've seen today is not just a collection of old photographs. It is a timeline of transformation, a silent record of how time shapes people, how struggle builds character, and how ordinary beginnings can turn into extraordinary destinies. Every celebrity you saw in these images once lived a life that was completely unknown to the world. No cameras following them, no headlines written about them, no global recognition. Just simple days, simple moments, and simple dreams. And that's where the real story begins. Because success is never loud in the beginning. It starts quietly, in small rooms, in unnoticed efforts, and in moments where no one is watching. These vintage photos capture that silence. They show us the version of life that existed before fame arrived. And when you look closely, you start to notice something powerful. They didn't look perfect. They didn't look famous. But they looked real. And maybe that's what makes these images so rare and valuable. Because in today's world, everything is polished, edited, and filtered. But these photos are raw. They remind us of a time when identity wasn't shaped by social media or public attention, but by real-life experiences. Now think about this for a moment. At that time, none of these individuals knew what their future held. They didn't know they would become global icons. They didn't know their faces would be recognized across continents. They didn't know their names would be remembered for generations. They were simply living life, step by step, day by day. And that's what makes their journey so powerful, because it tells us something very important. The future is never defined by the starting point. It is shaped by consistency, patience, and belief. These rare images are proof that transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, quietly, and often when no one is paying attention. And now, as we look back at everything we've seen today, one truth becomes very clear. Every success story you admire today was once invisible. Every famous name was once unknown. Every legend was once ordinary. And that is not just inspiring, it's human. So the next time you see a celebrity on screen, in magazines, or on social media, don't just see the fame. Try to imagine the journey behind it. the early struggles, the silent efforts, the moments of doubt, and the years of growth that no camera ever captured. Because what you are seeing today is only the final chapter, not the beginning. And maybe that's the real magic of these vintage photos. They don't just show us the past. They remind us of what is possible in the future. That somewhere right now, someone is living their own unknown beginning, just like all of these celebrities once did. And one day, their story will also be told as a journey from ordinary to unforgettable. And as we continue looking at these rare vintage moments, one thing becomes even more interesting. The contrast between then and now is not just visual, it's emotional. Because when you compare these early photos with today's world, it feels like two completely different realities. Today, everything is fast, polished, and public. But back then, life was slow, simple, and private. And in that simplicity, these future stars were quietly building their path. No pressure fame, no expectations from millions of people, just personal growth, one small step at a time. And that's something we often underestimate, because we live in a world where success looks instant. But these images remind us that it never is. Now look closely at these early faces again. What you'll notice is not perfection, but potential, a kind of raw energy that hadn't been shaped yet. Some of them look unsure. Some look completely normal. And some look like they had no idea what life was about to give them. But that's exactly what makes these moments powerful. Because potential doesn't look special in the beginning. It only becomes special over time. And as years passed, everything changed. Their lives transformed step by step. Opportunities came slowly. Hard work built up quietly. And eventually, the world started noticing them. But here's something important to understand. Fame didn't suddenly create these people. It only revealed what was already being built inside them. And that's why these vintage photos feel so real. They show us the foundation, not the final structure. Now imagine if someone had looked at them back then and said, "You'll become globally famous one day." Most people would have laughed, because at that time, there was nothing famous about them. But that's how life works. The future is never obvious in the beginning. And that's why these images are so fascinating to watch. They break one big illusion. That success belongs only to certain people. When in reality, success belongs to those who keep going when nothing is visible yet. As we move closer to the end of this journey, let's reflect on something simple but powerful. Every person in these photos had something in common. They didn't quit early. They didn't stop when things were unclear. They kept moving forward, even when the result was unknown. And that is the real message hidden in these vintage memories. Not fame, not luxury, not transformation, but persistence. Because if you remove everything else, that is what remains. And now, as we finally step back from these rare images, one thought stays with us. Maybe success is not about becoming someone else. Maybe it's about becoming more of who you already are, just like these celebrities did. Slowly, quietly, and over time, unmistakably. So when you see these vintage photos, don't just see the past, see the process. Because every great story you admire today was once just an ordinary beginning waiting for its moment. And there's one more thing these rare vintage photos quietly teach us. Change is not always visible in the moment. When these celebrities were living these early days, they didn't feel like anything special was happening. There was no big transformation they could notice instantly, just normal days passing one after another. But when we look back today, the change feels massive, and that's the trick of life. Real growth is often invisible while it's happening. You only realize it when enough time has passed. And maybe that's why looking at these photos feels so emotional, because they remind us that progress is not always loud. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it takes years. And sometimes it only becomes